Good morning, as we watch GF05 AEV disappear into the distance. Welcome to a lovely autumnal, pretty much clear sky. Warm if you're in the sunshine type of day. There's a lot been going on recently, got a lot of content, so I'm going to bring you this Christmas special, which is all about the news. The news being that the government, for the first time in 19 years, has decided to have a tinker with the dental contract in what they would say is a highly significant and meaningful way, but which people like me would say was a pretty desperate, pointless, unimpressive and inconsequential way, and a list of changes that are going to make no difference at all, pretty much. But I thought we'd go through them one by one, because for every story, for everything you hear on the news and that, there's a backstory. So I had Times Radio rang me up last night and said, could I go on Times Radio on the sort of 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock slot. So I might put a link to that in the notes. And there's a guy from Public Policy Exchange who's come out with a proposal to give everybody a voucher to have £150 that they can put towards the cost of their dentistry. Whether they spend it on the NHS or in the private sector, it's a sort of direct subsidy. Which is, is quite funny, really, because the General Dental Practitioners Association came up with this idea 6 years after the inception of the National Health Service. In 1954, they put forward a paper called Granting Aid, which is exactly what this was. It's giving people their NHS subsidy, but allowing them to spend it where they like. And there are some problems with it. And he's like all these Generation Z. He thinks he's reinvented the wheel, etc., etc. Doesn't really realise that, people have been doing it for years before him. Let's just clear the windscreen a bit. Anyway, the press release from the government announced that they'd had a consultation. I wasn't even aware that this consultation was going on. I don't think most dentists were. I think they had something like, 800 replies. No, they had 2,200 replies, that's it then, of which roughly a third were from the profession. And so that's like 800 dentists replied out of something like 32,000, and of which 25% were in the southeast. So that means out of my area, probably 200 dentists probably replied out of several thousand. So that just goes to show that this consultation wasn't widely publicised, or it was widely ignored. Let's put it, it's one of those two. So, I didn't know about it. I didn't reply. I probably wouldn't have replied, because I spent 40 years replying to these things. And Ken Weech, our parliamentary advisor, always used to say that the government doesn't hold a consultation on anything unless it knows in advance what he wants, what the result is going to be. So let's go through these things one by one and just discuss them and work out whether it's going to be is useful or useless. One of the things is that they are moving some items towards more of sort of a pay-as-you-go, which I think is a tacit acceptance by them that this stupid Three Bears porridge way of paying dentistry, flat rate fee for everything, is not, is not suited. And this is something I've said for a long time, that you can go full pay as you go, or you can go full capitation. But the best solution is somewhere in the middle, some capitation and some pay as you go. And what they're going to do is they're going to introduce 3 pathways, 3 extra pathways for people who've got toothache or gum disease, or both. Now, a pathway is just is a bit, it's like wishful thinking, If you'd like someone else to do something, what you do is you just tell them that they've got to get on this pathway. And the pathway is just a centralist, collectivist prescription for how someone else should be doing their job. And for the most part, if your income depends on your, government grants and subsidies, then, and they insist on you following this pathway, then obviously you do, because it's just basically, you turn up for work, you follow the pathways, and you get your money. I don't suppose you care very much about what people are trying to do on the pathway, and you probably don't care an awful lot about whether the pathways work or not, because at the end of the day, it's not your job, is it, to either understand the pathway or make sure the pathway works. Thank you. So it's sort of a mindless approach, a formulaic approach to any sort of provision of service or goods. But, the National Health Service seems to be convinced that probably that everybody's stupid, and secondly, that the only way they're going to get any sort of productivity out of people is to literally tell them how to do their job. It's very it's micromanagement, isn't it? Which is what the NHS is all about. So if you've got 5 or more fillings, or some sort of really chronic gum disease, or pain, then you're going to get there's going to be an element of pay as you go to what the dentist gets paid for treating you. Now, those of us who worked in dentistry in the 1980s, will know that we'd had the same contract for a long time by then. The contract that was brought in the early 50s was had settled in by then, and had 30 years of being fine-tuned. And by fine-tuned, I mean the dentist had found every loophole in that contract, and every loophole had been closed for 30 years, pretty much. I mean, I think the only loophole that was left in that old pay-as-you-go contract was the fact that the faster you worked, the more you earned, which was a nice loophole, and meant that there was a lot of NHS work got done, more than should be done, some people would say, but probably not much more. And it had the benefit of being very efficient and encouraging thrift, and everything being done cheaply and quickly, but to a higher standard, because the inspectorate was was pretty red hot on the quality. And it was a great contract, and if I was in government now, I'd be begging the profession to go back to the old contract, the pre-1990 contract, 1992 contract, because that was really the best deal the government ever had. But every time you bring in a new contract, and we've found this, with various contracts that we've had, the 1990 contract, the 2006 contract, it opens up there's a whole new can of loopholes, which the profession is keen to exploit. And I don't blame them for doing that. Honestly, I think that these contracts are written in, they don't have the benefit of being fine-tuned for 30 years. Let me put it that way. first year or two of a contract. Really, it's really defined very loosely. The profession is finding its way, the government's finding its way, and you know, I don't blame the profession for doing what the government has asked them to do. The profession always does what the government asks it to do, even if it's stupid, even if it's inefficient, even if it's crazy. They'll do it because you know, it's how you go to work, you do what you've been asked to do, and then at the end of the day you take home your pay. So immediately it springs out to me that there's a problem with this new pay-as-you-go fees, because they only kick in when you've got really, really severe gum disease, and they only kick in when you've got 5 or more fillings, decayed teeth. And they actually go so far as to define a decayed tooth as a tooth that's decayed into dentine. Well, I mean, do you know, this is again is like I mean, okay, perhaps they've tried to how can I put it, preempt dentists coming up with everybody having 5 fillings into enamel. Personally, I've never seen a decay that's just into enamel. It's always into dentine, especially these days. But what they've done is they've said, oh, these dentists, they'll do 5 little micro dot fillings in enamel. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the answer is that enamel's got no nerves inside it. The dentine has the nerves. So you could do 5 fillings in enamel without giving a local anaesthetic. And if you don't give a local anaesthetic, then you're obviously streets ahead, aren't you, in terms of efficiency, because there's no waiting for the patient to go numb or anything. So they know this thing's going to be abused, and they've sort of tried to write it in a way that it's not going to be abused. But they're vulnerable to the far greater abuse, which is for a dentist to look at every single patient and say, well, I've suddenly found 5 fillings. Or even if they have found 4 fillings, genuine fillings, that they could say, well, but I think that one's probably a filling as well. It's 50-50 on x-ray. So I'm going to not give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to assume that that's a 5th filling. Because if I do find 5 fillings, I'm going to get 200-300 quid bonus in effect. Or, you know, if someone's got gum disease, then it's always going to be severe gum disease. Oh, there's a bus. I'm not going to argue with him. Come on, come on. And, you know, this is the National Health Service is well aware that this is the way the system used to work. The Dental Estimates Board and the Dental Practice Board, as it became in Eastbourne, were very hot on the fact if you took teeth out and 9 out of 10 teeth qualified for an extra payment because they were of exceptional difficulty, they would be on your case and ask you why you're taking out, why all these teeth are of exceptional difficulty. Or if you put a filling in, if it was a large filling and it required a pin retention, then there was an extra fee for pin retention. But if 90% of your fillings required pin retention, then they would want to know why all of your fillings required pin retention, whereas other dentist fillings didn't. So they're going to have the same problem, aren't they? They're going to have to have inquiries why all of a sudden everybody's finding exactly 5 fillings. Not 6, not 4, but 5. and why everybody's got chronic gum disease all of a sudden, and why so many people all of a sudden have 5 fillings and chronic gum disease, qualifying for an extra bonus payment of £680, which if they've got chronic gum disease, or or if their gum disease isn't too bad and they've only got 4 fillings, you get absolutely 0. So some ham-fisted attempt to try and bring fee for item back into the fee scale, because they've realised that flat rate's not working. Something which we told them in, believe it or not, in 2006. Anyway, what else have they got? Let me have a quick look while I'm not driving. They're bringing in some recent sort of fairly low value payments for unscheduled care. I think it was £70. £70 to see the patient plus £5 for the make an appointment or something. I don't know, some weird arrangement. And then they've changed that to £60 for accepting the patient plus £15 for the appointment or something. So again, I don't think at £300 an hour to run a surgery, I don't think that's going to make a massive dent. There's a new band 2A for repair of existing dentures, which is, again, I think that's probably more an attempt to cope with the fact that nobody's making new dentures. But people who've got dentures that are unsatisfactory because they're broken or they don't fit, and they're working on the basis that a reline is pretty much as good as a new denture. So they've brought in this new band 2A. Again, the having more than 3 bands was something, again, I suggested to the Health Select Committee about a decade ago. Community water fluoridation schemes. Well, I've discussed this in the past. There was no fluoridation, and then Barry Cockcroft tried to bring in fluoridation, and then Southampton, this woman brought a court case, and it was found that they couldn't bring it in, and so they then said, well, we'd like to bring it in, but we can't bring it in because, legally we don't have the power to override the population. The population doesn't like it, and so they won't agree with it being brought in. And, you've got all this mass medication, lobbying, memes, etc. And fluoride is a poison, blah, blah, blah. And so the idea of, I think, community water fluoridation schemes, that's just been slung in, probably at Barry Cockcroft's insistence, who's now chairman of the National Fluoridation Society or something. But that's a complete non-starter. I mean, that is never, forget it. I put down there community water fluoridation schemes, LOL. For the children, I mean, not much in the way of fee for items, for chronic dental decay and stuff like that, but fluoride varnish. Now, fluoride varnish, I've got a very good understanding of where fluoride varnish is in the grand scheme of things. I went to all the meetings, the nice meetings in Manchester, were they, or Birmingham? Manchester, I think, where they tried to look at evidence-based dentistry, and they found that they had no evidence. There's no evidence on anything in dentistry. It's all been done because dentists knew that it worked, but they didn't want to take dentists' word for what worked and what didn't. The academics were very much, we have to be evidence-based, and they found over the course of many weeks, months and days of meetings that they had no evidence. The only evidence that was supplied by the fluoride varnish. They had one survey which said that fluoride varnish might work. So they said out of that came the recommendation that all children should have fluoride varnish applied to their teeth. And fluoride varnish went from being the practically, hardly prescribed to being prescribed more frequently than amoxil, which was the most popular antibiotic at the time. And they were going mad about how much amoxil was being prescribed, and then until COVID came along, and then of course all the people going around shouting that if we prescribe antibiotics like Smarties, we're all going to die. They all had to shut up because that's all patients could get during COVID was amoxil, and so but apparently nobody died. So so fortunately we've heard the last of the antibiotics like Smarties lobby, hopefully. But no, they and the main benefactors, I would say, far more than the children who had the fluoride on varnish on the teeth, is the manufacturers of the fluoride varnish, which in the case of Durafat, which is the most popular fluoride varnish and the best known brand, is Colgate. So Colgate, somehow has made sure that fluoride varnish is in here because it's good for business. And fissure sealants. Now, funnily enough, out of all the things they've recommended, fissure sealants are the only things that I would say are worthwhile. And are, when they're done properly, they are effective. But the problem with fissure sealants is like a sort of a varnish. You paint it on the teeth, it sets hard, and it seals up all the cracks and fissures on the biting surfaces of the teeth, which tends to stop the food getting stuck down there, and it tends to stop the biting surfaces of the teeth go decayed. The biggest problem with it is that the teeth that most commonly go decayed are the first molars, and they come through about age 6. So even if you wait until the first molar gets decayed, and then fissure seal up the other 3, then you've already got 25% of the potential decay, haven't you? 1 out of 4 teeth already gone decayed. And if you do it in advance, then obviously you may be sealing up a load of kids who don't need the sealing. And secondly, you're going to be doing it on a bunch of 5-year-olds. And, I've got to tell you, 5-year-olds are not the most cooperative patients in the world, especially when you're, to do this, you need a really dry field. To get this to bond on correctly, you have to wash the teeth. Ideally, you have to polish them with pumice, oil-free polish, so that the sealant sticks. You then have to etch them for a minute with 40% phosphoric acid gel, in the mouth of a 5-year-old, and you then have to apply the fissure sealant and shine a light on it so it sets. And if you do all that perfectly, then you get really good fissure sealants that last a long time and are very effective. If you don't do that, if you just paint them on to claim the money, then they're going to fall off, within a day or two or a week or two or something. So, but at least they are easily checkable, unlike your 5 fillings or your chronic gum disease, which you can always claim that you've treated and have miraculously cleared up, or the 5 fillings that no one can say that the 5 fillings you didn't need doing, unless I suppose they start asking for x-rays. They might say, no, we need x-rays showing the 5 fillings before you did them. But this is micromanagement and it never works. And I've always said that the best people to run the dental service are the dentists. But no, but they won't trust the dentist. They don't trust the dentist. They won't trust the dentist. They don't agree with the dentists. They don't even like the dentist. So why would they let them dentists run the dental service? Now, 3,400 a year for clinical audit / peer review. Okay, again, bit insulting. Sort of sending out the message that you lot are all useless, and so you need someone to look over you and just you need to demonstrate that you're doing things properly. Not. It's like, I've got a small surgery. There's only 3 of us, and yet if the CQC was to come around, they would demand to see minutes of our staff meetings. We don't need staff meetings. There's only 3 of us. You know what I'm saying? We are very flexible. We pivot on the spot if we need to on something. We're constantly looking for ways to save money, to improve quality. That's our service level agreement, is to do good quality dentistry, make money and have fun. And we're constantly looking for ways to do that. And we do not need to sit down and come up with some entirely fictitious chat GPT generated minutes. to show that we are shit hot on quality. You can see that if you just sit down and watch the way we work. This £3,400 a year plus 6 UDAs for appraisals, which is like, you know, to have some sort of report card for all the dentists and the hygienists and the staff and everything. Smacks to me a bit of just trying to inject money into the system without paying more money for the work. You know, it's like, it's fixed, isn't it? It's 3,400. It's not like if they said, well, we're going to enhance all the UDAs by 10%, that would cost them hundreds of millions. This is £3,400 per practice for clinical audit. Is probably only going to cost them 2-3 million at the most, I'd imagine. So while on the face of it, it sounds quite good, I honestly don't even think it's going to be justified by the amount of work it's going to generate. It's a bit like having work experience people in, you know. You're sort of like, oh, come and get a work experience person and stay with you for 2 weeks. What can they do? Well, they can do anything, you know. They'll just get some experience of work. You tell them what to do. And then you say, all right, then. So they say, all right, here they are. This is when they're coming. This is the paperwork you've got to fill in. It's a 23-page form. We need to see your health and safety assessments. We need to see your fire risk assessments, blah, 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 because we can't just put them anywhere, you know. We've got to do like a complete inspection of your practice before we'll let our little 13-year-old or 14-year-old come along and stuff. In the old days, it was like stuffing envelopes and stuff like that. But now we just turn around. When we're asked to, we just say, look, are they hepatitis C vaccinated? Because if not, we can't do it. And then it's like, oh, right, okay, fine. So it's not worth the ag, you know what I mean? So, okay, if you're big on building up the amount of money you can get out of the NHS, then of course you're going to go for all of this. You'll be rubbing your hands. You'll be like, oh, this is great. Extra paperwork, but extra money. But you know, I'm just not in that game anymore. How are they going to pay for it? Well, obviously they're going to pay less for other stuff, mainly checkups. And again, fewer checkups is something that's a hangover from years ago. National Institute of Clinical Health and Clinical Excellence did the review on checkups originally, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it was done at a time when they were trying to cut corners, you know, starve the horse a bit more by saying to dentists and patients in particular, you know, you don't need to go for a 6 monthly checkup. If you go for a 6 monthly checkup, all you're doing is giving your dentist the opportunity to find a filling, to find something to do, you know, to enhance his income at your expense. So if you've got pretty healthy mouth, don't go every 6 months, because these dentists, they cannot resist temptation. The temptation's too high for them to even give you a scale and polish. They objected to you even having a scale and polish every 6 months. And that is what patients do like. I mean, if I know what patients like, they like check up, scale and quick scale and polish. If they need a minimal scale and polish, then we do it for them free of charge with the checkup. And they greatly appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why they come in for their checkups. First of all, to make sure nothing's starting up that might be expensive and difficult to treat down the line, but also because they know we'll give them a little descale and polish at the same time, and they'll go away feeling lovely, and that their 35 quid that they've spent is very justified. So what people don't understand about the NICE report on checkups was it was commissioned to ensure that dentists did fewer checkups. So when they say, well, you know, the NICE recommendation is that everybody has a checkup at least once every 2 years, that was because some people have no teeth, and if they were under the impression that they didn't need checkups at all. And because oral cancer was a big thing at the time, NICE said you can't go less than once every 2 years, because if you've got a massive grey carcinoma in your palate because you're a smoker, then that needs to be picked up. And only a checkup every 2 years stands a chance of picking it up. So 2 years minimum, but for more healthy people, fewer checkups. And so what they've done is they've dug up the zombie corpse of this policy and said we can pay for all these other things like the complex care needs and um, the neglected gums and the emergency appointments and things like that by digging up the zombie corpse of this checkup policy and saying what we've got to do is we've got to cut down on the number of checkups. And the way they're doing this is because they are going to they're what they call a public education program, which basically means going to the public and saying, look, if you've got basically a healthy mouth, you do not need to go for 6 monthly checkups. Now, the reason why the policy failed in the first case was because people are just for 50 years they've been told they need to go for 6 monthly checkups and brush their teeth twice a day. It's just in their brains. And so telling someone that they don't have to go, I mean, I have told patients that they do not need to come in for 6 monthly checkups. I have told them that. It doesn't help that on our dental plan, we get people in for 4 monthly checkups. That's 3 times a year, even if they're extremely healthy. And the reason is that on the dental plan, obviously, I can be trusted to do that because should anything be wrong with their mouth at the 4 monthly checkup, then it's me that has to pay for it. I'm the one. I want to see them that frequently because I want to do things when they're negligible or more ideally prevent stuff. But on the NHS, it's like they've got this great fear that the dentist might find something or think of something to do or invent something to do that they really want to keep the patients out of the dentist. So they're fighting a losing battle because, as I say, these patients are not at all open, receptive to the idea that perhaps they don't need to come in every 6 months. And as I say, some people, I've said to them, like, your mouth's really healthy. You haven't had a filling in your life. You're 30 years old. Your brushing's pretty good. I only need to see you once a year. And they say to me, Derek, I know, all right, I hear what you say, but I'd still like to come every 6 months. If it's all right with you, I love my teeth. I want to keep them healthy. And I'd still like to come every 6 months. And I'm like, this is what I'm saying to you, that your risk is so low. You really don't need to. When they say, well, okay, so I hear you. I don't need to, but I still want to. I'll see you in 6 months. I'm like, right, okay, fine. You want to spend 35 quid on a bit of reassurance. I mean, basically that's their prerogative, isn't it? They can do that if they want to. Uh, So and the other thing that they've resurrected from years ago, round about when it's turned out that the contract was going so badly, was that this idea of getting dentists in from overseas. So they've subcontracted this job to the General Dental Council, who have subcontracted it to University College. Because it's a 3-part. The overseas registration exam is 3 parts. One is, I think, in person on computer, and the second one is a clinical skill. And I don't know. I think the third part might be an academic one. I don't know. But anyway, it's the first 2 parts. They've subcontracted to UCL on the basis that they pretty much double the number of, they clear the bottleneck of stage 1 and stage 2 applications, which is what everyone's needs to take and wants to take. Now, we've got to a situation where about 1/3, 30% of all the dentists in the UK are non-UK qualified. And this is, I don't know what the factors are at play in here. I don't really know how to explain what's going on there. I would like to think that I'm not that bothered if they're non-UK qualified, but I do know that they're culturally they have a different attitude. To be quite honest with you, UK trained ones these days have quite a different attitude. They're far more see far more dentistry as a means to make money than they ever were motivated about curing decay, which was what I was when I qualified. I thought I'd have wiped out decay by now. Little did I know. But if you go to a non-UK trained dentist, then I mean, and I know, again, I know I've got direct personal first-hand evidence that I've represented non-UK trained dentists in front of the GDC for various issues, only in the capacity as sort of secretary of the GDPA. And a typical case will be a patient would complain that they had some treatment and they got toothache afterwards, and that they'll complain about the standard of the work. And what will trip the dentist up, the non-UK trained dentist, is that what will happen is that they will have done the filling on a Saturday. And the reason why they will have done the filling on a Saturday is because their cousin, who works as a dental receptionist, will have told them that the practice where she's the receptionist doesn't work on Saturday or Sunday, but they have got the keys to the practice. And so if they wanted to do a bit of moonlighting on a Saturday in somebody else's premises with their materials and compressed air, but there's an opportunity there, and that's when the filling will have been done. Of course, that's highly convenient for the patients. They would love to have a practice that's open Saturdays and Sundays. So, but then it all goes wrong because they get toothache, and then so what they do is they know that they've got to prescribe antibiotics for this patient, but they can't prescribe antibiotics because they don't have a performers list number. So what they do is they then realise that they have got in their own medicine cabinet, or their mother's medicine cabinet, or their cousin's medicine cabinet, I don't know, a half-finished course of antibiotics, which they could say, look, there should be 21 tablets and I've only got 17, but you're welcome to have them. But they then don't meet them in the practice. They then say, do you know the McDonald's on the corner of Green Lane and wherever? I'll meet you there. And so they meet the patient there, and the patient is given these antibiotics, and they say, well, why isn't my name on this bottle? They're obviously second-hand antibiotics. And the dentist says, doesn't matter. They're good. They're in date. I mean, they will work. So, this is the solution. And this all comes out of the GDC hearing. And the dentist then gets struck off. So to put a charitable spin on that, you could say that you've got there a dentist who's trying to apply their trade, who is enterprising, to say the least, and who has gone above and beyond to make sure that their patient has got some antibiotics when against all the odds, and has gone to the convenience from the patient's point of view of working at the weekend and meeting them at their local McDonald's. But the contrary spin, which is what the GDC tends to put on these things, is that they are that this is well below the standard that we should expect in this country. And you can see their point, I suppose. My worry is that these non-UK trained dentists who are coming in are going to be, although they always say in the guff, subject to qualifying to the highest standards expected in the UK, etc., etc. And you think, I know why you've put that in, because you know damn well, and I know, and you know that I know, and I know that you know that I know, that is never the case. They're never the case. If they've qualified in Romania, they may have qualified in a dental school that used string-driven drills, which had no lights during the day because they couldn't afford to turn the lights on. Where the only, you go in there, and I've been in these places, you go in the clinic and the only lights are the dental lights that are shining in the patient's mouths. So, these things have been tried. Fluoridation has been tried. Getting dentists in from abroad has tried. Even getting women back from after having babies has been tried. Putting a ban on early retirement has been tried. There isn't a thing in the world they haven't tried, and they are now trotting out all these tired things and trying them all again. But they're going to treble the overseas places, the opportunities for the ORE 1 and 2 exam through UCL. And they reckon that by that last year, this year, I would imagine the number of non-UK trained dentists in the UK will probably go over 50%. In other words, we'll have more than half the dental workforce will be non-UK trained. Now, why do they think that's a good idea? Well, I mean, in the old days, it was like if you recruited a Romanian dentist who's working in some, the arse end of Bucharest, they would be happy to come over here and work for what the NHS pays. And I think that's still the case. They still think that the main reason they recruit abroad is because these people have got low expectations in terms of earnings. When they move to this country and find out how much it costs to rent a flat or buy a house or run a car, go to a restaurant, their expectations of their earnings are going to shift pretty quickly upwards, just believe you me. So that's a temporary thing. You may be able to get people on your payroll, but they won't stay there. And there's no guarantee that they're going to stay working on the NHS anyway, is there? Because there's absolutely no control. They're not. I mean, they may try and tie them into contracts that commit them to the NHS. Talking of which, I mean, and just while we're on the subject of the GDC, we've just had a new chairman of the GDC, chairperson, and I was just reading. It's Helen Phillips, I think her name is, and I was just reading her CV, and it really, it just fills you with despair, and teaches you not to hope that anything's changed when you read these people's CVs. I'll give you a quick excerpt of it. She's got a BSc in zoology, right? I mean, immediately you think to yourself, oh, how is that helpful in dentistry? She's got a PhD in environmental science. She's been a board director of Yorkshire Water. I mean, she is absolutely archetypal example of non-executive director. I'm surprised she's not a baroness. I'm sure she will be a baroness very soon, because these people move from job to job and they do the most random jobs, and they are selected because they are place people in these quangos, these quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisations like the General Dental Council and the review body, who are constantly saying that they are independent of government. The more they say they're independent of government, the more you know that they're not independent of government. And she'll have been put in this place, and someone's had a word in her ear and said, look, the government policy really is to stuff the profession with overseas graduates. And that's how it's done. It's done through the General Dental Council. They set the exams, they handle all the registration and everything. So just understand that this is your job. In the same way as was it Duncan Rudkin was brought in to change the standard of proof in terms of GD cases from balance of probability to from beyond reasonable doubt to beyond balance of probability. When I qualified, if you were found guilty of something by the General Dental Council, it had to be found beyond reasonable doubt, which was the criminal standard. And I thought that was good, because they were depriving you of your liberty. They could deprive you of a liberty, whereas Rudkin came in with a Colin, what's his name, and they set about changing the standard to just on the balance of probability, which more likely than not. In other words, what do you think? Toss a coin. What do you think? Do you think he did it, or do you think he didn't? I'm more inclined to think that he did. Okay, we'll strike him off. And they brought in this minimum 5 years as well. You couldn't be struck off for a year or put on probation 6 months or anything. You were 5 years off the register before you could reapply. What on earth you're supposed to? I mean, there's a deterrent effect there, certainly. But I don't know what you were supposed to be doing in the 5 years while you were waiting to reapply. Obviously, you'd have to find some other form of income. Was it supposed to teach you a lesson that, you had a privileged position and you threw it all away? Or was it supposed to make sure that you had to get another job so that you were less likely to reapply because, in 5 years' time you might be established as a bricklayer or something? I honestly don't. I think it was just punitive. I think it was just one of the things that Philip said in her press release was that she was going to, I forget the exact words, but she said something about she's going to make sure that there's no more reign of terror. The French reign of terror was over, and that they were all going to be warm and cuddly, the General Dental Council, and not be nightmare body that was objectively illogical and would strike people off just for looking at the patients the wrong way. So in a way, they've sort of acknowledged that they went far too far, and she's said that specifically that she's pulling back a bit, which is good. But just to finish off her CV, she's chaired the Legal Services Board, and Chesterfield Royal Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, which I'd imagine they don't commission a lot of dentistry, and it certainly doesn't. I don't think she has the first clue about running a dental practice. She was an independent commissioner at the Gambling Commission, and prior to her non-executive career, she served as founding chief executive of Natural England and director for Wales of the Environment Agency. Now, okay, there must be some directory, some secret directory, in the same way as there's a secret list of builders, where the builders firms maintain a blacklist of builders that are constantly accident prone or always off on sick or whatever, or don't work very hard. And this list doesn't exist, but it exists, in the same way as Pontins, or was it Butlins, had a list of surnames that they wouldn't book people on their holidays. If you were called Flaherty or Murphy or something, then mysteriously Butlins and Pontins became full when you tried to book. And this list didn't exist, but it existed. And there must be a list of people who are like totally pliable and open to any form of non-executive directorship or remuneration. and once you've wound them up like a clockwork toy and pointed them in the direction that you want them to go in, they just off they go and do it, and they do it until it's done, and then they move on to something else. They become chief executive of the National Lottery or something. And we suffered from this in the past. I mean, this is not a new thing. We had there was a woman who was an absolute disaster. The government brought in new rules about they had a lot of trouble with husbands not paying maintenance to the wives. So they brought in a regulatory body which had the power to make orders that recalcitrant husbands, should have their wages garnished, and their wages would then go straight to the wife. So the wife who was struggling to bring up the kids and not getting their maintenance off the husbands, this was supposed to solve the problem. But the woman who was brought in to set it up and lead it made such a pig's ear of it that she was moved on. And, I'm not saying it was totally her fault, because the husbands, being a wily lot, realised that as soon as an order was made, if you said that their circumstances had changed and that you needed a variation on that order, they could get out of complying with that order, and then it would be another 9 months before another order was made, at which point they would say their circumstances have changed again. So it was a difficult situation, but which she singularly failed to solve. And she was moved sideways. But so where was she moved? She was moved to the General Dental Council. No thought at all to our feelings about having somebody moved in charge of the General Dental Council, the standards body, that was such an abject failure in their last job and widely laughed at. Really, it was done a risible job of looking after this remit that she had, and she just had to be put somewhere. And I suppose it was either Northern Ireland, which was the old punishment, wasn't it, to be sent to Northern Ireland, or some backwater, some non-director, some non-executive directorship or chief executiveship in some backwater of the government quangos, the government, the panoply of government appointments, and so on. And she was equally useless in charge of the GDC, and I think probably instituted the reign of terror. So anyway, I'm going to get going. We're going to get driving back, and then I'll just move on to the other subjects that I've got, and then hopefully you've been listening to this on 1.4, and I'll talk to you in a minute. So there we go. So that's like a deep dive into the government's proposals for the NHS. They're not, in my opinion, they're not really going to amount to much. Someone's got the same idea as me. So don't get too excited. Certainly if you're a patient, don't get too excited. The other sort of things that are going on at the moment, the government, the junior resident doctors, or whatever they're called now, have started a 5-day strike. The doctors are sort of quite, people would describe them as militant. I would say they're working together well as a team to get what they want. They consulting everybody by email, which is great, because when we had a strike ballot at the GDPA, we had to write to everybody, and it had to be done through the Electoral Reform Society. So fortunately, they've got a much quicker way, I think, of consulting with their members, which is great. And their members are, for the most part, are pretty united behind the objective that the BMA is trying to achieve. Now, what is the BMA trying to achieve, and why is it so important? The government is fighting back by saying that the doctors have had a 25% pay rise this year, and now they've come back and they want more. Now, of course, they did all this with the dentists, so I know how the Department of Health comms machine works. They'll say 25% this year, but what they'll mean is that was last year's pay rise and it was just paid this year, whatever. They'll lie around the edges of the subject to give the press a soundbite, which sounds very, very persuasive. And on the face of it, if someone says, well, you've had a 25% pay rise and now you want another 28%, that's unreasonable, then on the face of it, everyone who hears that is going to say, well, bloody hell, yeah, that is right. What are they thinking? And I happen to know what they're thinking, so let me explain it to you. There are two broad groups of employees in this or contractors in this economy. One is the public sector and one is the private sector. Now, the government is only concerned really with pay and conditions in the public sector. So, and paying conditions in the private sector are set by market forces. So, what that means is when times are good and everybody's feeling flush, the private sector tends to do quite well, and that's when you get very large bonuses, very large profits, etc., etc. And the way the government explains it is that that's offset when times are really tough. because the private sector is exposed to the vagaries of the market when there's a downturn. And then what happens is that firms go bust, staff are laid off, there are no pay rises, and there may even be pay cuts or redundancies or whatever. And so in the private sector, it's very much a boom or bust. It's either raining, it's either sunny, or it's raining. But what the government will tell you if you work in the public sector is that you're unlucky. You don't work in such a cutthroat environment. You're not at the mercy of rabid capitalists. You're privileged to have a job that is going to probably be there rain or shine. And as a result, when things are good and everyone's flush with money, possibly you shouldn't expect your wages to go up that much, because when there are grey skies, you don't and expect your wages to go down. You know, they don't have the shakeouts in the public sector during the financial downturns like they do in the private sector. So, and you should think of that as a perk, as a benefit of being in a public sector job, the job security. So and so relative to wages in the private sector, wages in the public sector fall behind when times are good. But what happens is they catch up when times are bad, because private sector wages stagnate, whereas public sector wages, you still might get an inflation adjusted pay rise. Now, that's the story. That's the narrative. In practice, what happens is that when times are good, in the public sector, you don't get the money. That is true. But when times are bad in the public sector, you also don't get the money. So that's why you're stuck earning always less than you would in the private sector, and less than you deserve, and less than you should get, and less than you were promised. So, and we found this out, with the so-called independent doctors and dentists review body. What happened was when the government would very rarely implement the review body's recommendations in full in terms of percentage increase, but when times were bad, they would argue that they couldn't implement the review body's recommendations because it's public money and they have to be very careful with it. As Dickens said, you've got two places to spend every halfpence. So we were shafted. In fact, when times were bad, we were doubly shafted, because what happened was the government, in its evidence to the review body, would say, the economy's doing badly, therefore we don't think, you should give these dentists a big pay rise out of public funds. And so the review body would say, well, okay, we were going to give them 4%, but we accept the government arguments that the economy is in bad shape, and therefore we'll halve our recommendation to 2%. And the government would rub their hands and say, oh, that's fine. Well, in that case, what we'll do is we'll take your 2%, and because the economy is in a bad shape and we can't afford to pay your whole recommendation, we'll halve it again to 1%. And so in effect, we were in double jeopardy. We would lose twice, we were shafted twice. And so what happens is, as time goes by, as decades go by, if you work in the public sector, you're constantly being encouraged and goaded on with these stories about jam tomorrow. But the jam never arrives. The jam never arrived. Well, it never arrived for dentists. And I'm sure it never arrived for the doctors. And what the doctors are doing is they're saying, we don't like your jam narrative. We want to be put back in the position that we would have been in if we had been paid in the way that you said that you were going to pay us. So whereas let's say for example that in the last 10 years compared to wages that doctors pay or dentists pay has fallen 25%. What they're doing is they're just saying they want their differentials restored. They want to be put back in the place where they would have been if the government had shafted them twice and held down their wages in the good times and double held down their wages in the bad times. And you can easily, okay, there's a certain amount of subjectivity to picking a year, but you can easily pick a year and say our wages have gone down X% in real terms since this year. And this is the year we want to be put back to. And this is my old argument with the review body about us being in the top decile. I would say that we should start off with a request on the NHS to be put back into the top decile of earnings. That would probably involve doubling the NHS fees or trebling them. And it's not going to happen, but this is what the doctors have taken the correct approach. They've quite rightly said, it's all very well you saying that you've given us 25% pay rise, but you haven't, because this comes on the heels of a 25% pay cut, let's say over the last 10 years. That 25% that you had to give us to make us to go back to work because you finally pushed us so far that we've gone on strike is really what we just needed to be put back to where we were. That doesn't include any pay rises, and bearing in mind that the government regards a rise that keeps you up with inflation that they've created as a pay rise, whereas in fact it isn't. In real terms, it's not. It's just keeping you on the same pay. So, so that's how they come up with these 25, 28 on top of 25, because most of that is their differentials, and the differentials have arisen for the reasons that I've just explained. The pay review body, so-called independent pay review body, has caused the problem by not feeding the horse. The horse has died. They've got no doctors today. The doctors have died. They've gone on strike. I mean, the dentists have gone on strike as well, in a way, because there's no NHS dentists. They've all gone into the private sector. There was a time when they were on strike. Around about 1992, there was a dentist strike. And at that point, they could have, possibly, if they'd been sensible, they could have retained all the dentists on the NHS by sorting out our grievances, but they never did. And so dentists don't strike. Well, okay, they did strike by withdrawing their labour. Most didn't, but a few did. Certainly the Isle of Wight went completely private overnight thanks to the 1992 fee cut. But, your dentist strike in a better way, which was that, and it was sort of typified by the difference between the British Dental Association and the General Dental Practitioners Association during the 1992 strike, where the British Dental Association said to their dentists, we want you to strike. In other words, we don't want you to do any NHS work. And that was very difficult for their members because there was no income, Whereas the GDPA's advice was far more pragmatic, which was to reduce your reliance on the National Health Service. Not to not necessarily do any, but just to realise, just wake up and smell the coffee, see which way the wind's blowing. You need to be on some sort of plan to cut down your NHS side of your practice and big up the independent and, the capitation the plan side and the private side, the pay-as-you-go side. And I think our advice was far more pragmatic and useful to the dentist, and turned out to be correct in the long term, because what happened was, when the British Dental Association was forced to capitulate by the Department of Health, they had to issue an edict to their members to actually go back and work on the NHS. They had to say, okay guys, it's all, over now, it's settled, in effect, go back on the NHS. Whereas our advice stayed the same. We never changed it, even after it was clear that we weren't going to, the terms and conditions on the NHS weren't going to ever improve enough to attract a reasonably large number of people back into the NHS. Our advice to reduce your reliance on the NHS was, and still is, I think the best advice you could give any dentist. Anyway, we're nearly back now. So there's one other good thing, which, by the way, I'm working through the backlog of all the old videos I've done, but I thought I'd do this one today because I'm off today and I've got the time to do the post-production. So hopefully I should have it uploaded this afternoon. But I've got another really, really good bit of news. So put the old like and subscribe on, or subscribe anyway. You don't have to like it, but you will like it because it's a really, really good bit of news, and it's a bit of news that's going to save you money, and it's a bit of news that's going to save the dental profession millions of pounds, I tell you, if they only take any notice of it, but they won't. So, but you can. It'll save you hundreds. Oh. This car rattles and rocks and rolls, but it doesn't have a squeaky clutch anymore because the clutch fell off. So I've had to have a new clutch put in. Well, a new clutch pedal, steady on, not a new clutch. But anyway, that's got rid of the squeak. But I've still got my toolkit in the back, so. Anyway, here we are, home sweet home. I'll talk to you later. Bye.